Marcelo Hilario del Pilar y Gatmaitán, better known by his pen name Plaridel, was a Filipino writer, lawyer, and journalist. He was the second and last editor of the La Solidaridad, the newspaper of the reform movement in Spain. Biography, early life, birth and family background. Marcelo Hilario del Pilar y Gatmaitán was born on August 30, 1850 in Kupang, Bulacan, Bulacan. He was baptized Marcelo Hilario on September 4, 1850. The surname of his grandmother, del Pilar, was added to comply with a decree issued by Governor-General Narciso Clavera in 1849. Del Pilar, a unregistered trademark. Parents owned several farms, some fish ponds, and an animal power mill. His father, Julian Hilario del Pilar, was a Tagalog grammarian, poet, and speaker. He was a three-time gobernador-cilo of his pueblo. Julian later held the position of official de mesa of the alcalde mayor. Blas Gatmaitán, del Pilar, unregistered trademark. Mother, was a descendant of the noble Gatmaitán. She was known as Do plus or minus a Blasica. The ninth of 10 children, del Pilar's siblings were, Toribio, Fernando, Andrea, Dorotea, Estanislao, Juan, Hilaria, Valentia N., and Mara A. The share of each was very small and del Pilar renounced his in favor of his siblings. Early education, del Pilar learned to play the piano, violin, and flute at an early age. He learned his first letters from his paternal uncle Aljo del Pilar, the clerk of the court of Quiapo in 1860. He began his studies in the school of Senior Hermenegildo Flores. He later transferred at the Colegio de San Jose Copyright in Manila. After obtaining his bachelor en art, he pursued law at the Universidad de Santo Tomás. Interruption of law studies at UST. In 1869, del Pilar acted as a padrino or godfather at a baptism in San Miguel, Manila. Since he was not a resident of the area, he questioned the excessive baptismal fee charged by the parish priest. The priest was outraged by this statement. As a result, the judge, FAR copyright Lixgarca Gavirs, sent del Pilar to Old Bilabid prison. He was released after 30 days. Cavite Mutiny. During the time of the Cavite Mutiny in 1872, del Pilar was living with a Filipino priest named Mariano Sevilla. Sevilla was deported to the Mariana Islands along with del Pilar's eldest brother, Fr. Toribio Hilario del Pilar, due to allegations of being one of the organizers of the uprising. The deportation of Fr. Toribio resulted into the early death of del Pilar's mother. Activities after the Cavite Mutiny and marriage. Out of the university, del Pilar worked as official de mesa in Pampanga and Quiapo. In the month of February 1878, he married his second cousin Marciana in Tondo. The couple had 7 children, 6 girls and 1 boy, Sofia, Jose Copyright, Mara Rosario, Mara Aconsolesa Cubden, Mara Concepa Cubden, Jose Copyright, and Ana. Only 2 girls, Sofia and Anita, grew to adulthood. Returned to UST and graduation. In 1878, del Pilar resumed his law studies at the UST. He earned his licenciado en jurisprudencia in 1880. After finishing law, he worked for the Real Audiencia de Manila. Although practicing law in Manila, del Pilar spent more time in Bulacan, spreading nationalist and anti-friar ideas in cockpits, tiendas, and town plazas. Anti-friar campaign in the Philippines, Diaryong Tagalog, del Pilar, together with Basilio Teodoro Moran, founded the short-lived Diaryong Tagalog in 1882. Diaryong Tagalog was the first bilingual newspaper in the Philippines and was financed by the wealthy Spanish liberal Francisco Cavo Waimua plus or minus Oz. Del Pilar became the editor of the Tagalog section. Jose Copyright Rizal's essay Al Ama Patria was featured in the newspaper. Del Pilar translated it into Tagalog language, Ang Pag-ibig sa Tinuba ang Lupa. Anti-friar activities in Malolos. Malolos became the center of del Pilar's anti-friar movement. The first success of the campaign was in 1885, when the liberal Manuel Sriza Cubstomo was elected gobernador-cilo by the citizens of Malolos. Shortly after this victorious event, Del Pilar, together with the cabezas de barangay of Malolos, argued with the town's friar curate over the collection of exorbitant taxes. The friar curate, who derived the cabezas list from the parochial list, included those who did not live in the town and also those who had already died. The Bernando Incident, in 1887, during the patronal fiesta of Our Lady of Rosary in Bernando, the notorious incident occurred between the natives, Chinese, and Chinese mestizos. The gobernador Silo de Naturals of Bernando, Timoteo Lanuza, requested Fr. Jose copyright Hevia Campo Manes, the friar curate of Bernando Church, to prioritize the natives over the Chinese in the fiesta. Fr. Hevia rejected Lanuza's request and decided not to attend the celebration. Majority of the gobernador Silos of Manila attended the celebration. Fr. Hevia was later removed as friar curate of Bernando by the Governor-General. The whole incident had been prepared by Juan Zulueta, whose assessor was Del Pilar. Implementation of Quiroga's decree on funerals. On October 18, 1887, Benigno Quiroga y la Cubed Pez Ballesteros, the Director General of Civil Administration in Manila, issued an executive order prohibiting the exposition of corpses in the churches. Sriza Cubed Stomo, the Gobernador Silo of Malolos at the time, proclaimed Quiroga's decree by means of a parade led by a brass band. Friar Felipe Garcia, the friar curate of Malolos, aggravated the authorities by parading the body of the servant of Eugenio Delgado. Upon the advice of Del Pilar, Sriza Cubed Stomo addressed the problem to the Spanish governor of Bulacan, Manuel Gar Cubed Mesflorio. Gar Cubed Mesflorio reprimanded the fighting friar parish priest. Establishment of schools in Bulacan. On January 21, 1888, Del Pilar worked for the establishment of a school of arts, trades, and agriculture by drafting of a memorial to the Gobernador Civil of Bulacan. This was signed by the Gobernador Silos, ex-Gobernador Silos, leading citizens, proprietors, industrialists, professors, and lawyers of the province. Anti-friar protest in Manila. On the morning of March 1, 1888, the principals of the districts of Manila and the nearby provinces marched to the office of the civil governor of Manila, Jose Copyright Centeno Garca. They presented a manifesto addressed to the Queen Regent. This manifesto, entitled Viva Spa Plus or Minus A. Viva el Rey. Viva el Isha Copyright RCITO. For los Reales. Was written by Del Pilar. The manifesto enumerated the abuses crimes of the friars and demanded their expulsion from the Philippines, including Manila Archbishop Pedro P. Payo himself. A week after the demonstration, Centeno resigned and left for Spain. Governor-General Emilio Tirrero's term also ended the following month. Tirrero was succeeded by acting Governor-General Antonio Molto. Del Pilar's defense of Rizal's Naulai Mitanga, Fr. Jose Copyright Rodriguez, an Augustinian priest, authored a pamphlet entitled A Cara Plus or Minus Gat Ko. Zamor Plus or Minus Gar Masa Samang Libro, T. Casualatan. The friar warned the Filipinos that in reading Rizal's Naulai Mitanga they commit mortal sin. On August 3 of the same year, Del Pilar wrote Karagat Ka Cubed. It was a reply to Fr. Rodriguez's A Cara Plus or Minus Gat Ka Cubed. Later activities in the Philippines and escape to Spain, investigations under Molto were intensified upon the arrival of the new Governor-General, Valeriano Huila. Gar Cubed Mesflorio, the Spanish governor of Bulacan, was removed from his post. An arrest warrant was issued against Del Pilar, accusing him of being a filibusterer or subversive. Upon the advice of his friends and relatives, Del Pilar left Manila for Spain on October 28, 1888. The night before he left the country, Del Pilar stayed at the house of his fellow Bulaki plus or minus O, Pedro Serrano y Lactai. Together with Rafael Enriquez, they wrote the Dazalan at Toxan, a mock prayer book satirizing the Spanish friars. They also wrote the Pasia Cubed Ng Dapat Ipagalap ng Pasonang Taong Babasa. Del Pilar was also able to organize the Kajada Giza S. Mara Ay Jose Copyright, the purpose of which was to carry on propaganda and provide scholarships to indigent children. He headed it with the assistance of Mariano Ponce, Gregorio Santilla N., Mariano Sreza Stomo, Lactai, and Jose Copyright Gatmaitán. Kajada Giza S. Mara Ay Jose Copyright was later dissolved and replaced by Comita Copyright de Propaganda in Manila. Propaganda movement in Spain. Del Pilar arrived in Barcelona on January 1, 1889. He headed the political section of the Asociación Cubana en Hispano-Filipina de Madrid. On December 15, 1889, he succeeded Graciano La Cubed Pezena as editor of the La Solidaridad. Under his editorship, the aims of the newspaper expanded. Using propaganda, it pursued the desires for assimilation of the Philippines as a province of Spain, removal of the friars and the secularization of the parishes, freedom of assembly and speech, equality before the law, and Philippine representation in the Cortes, the legislature of Spain. Closure of La Solidaridad. From 1890 to 1895, Del Pilar published La Solidaridad almost on his own as funding was scarce in the Philippines. Publication of the fortnightly stopped on November 15, 1895. Before his death, Del Pilar rejected the theory of assimilation. Planning an armed struggle, Del Pilar stated, "This statement inspired the Katipunan, a revolutionary organization founded by André Copyright S. Bonifacio." Later years, illness, and death. Del Pilar's last years saw his descent into extreme poverty. He often missed his meals and during winter, he kept himself warm by smoking discarded cigarette butts he picked up in the streets. Suffering from tuberculosis, Del Pilar decided to return to the Philippines. His illness worsened that he had to cancel his journey. He was taken to the Hospital de la Santa Cruz in Barcelona. Del Pilar died there on July 4, 1896, a few days before the cry of Pagdaloyan. He was buried the following day in a borrowed grave at the Cementerio del Sub-Oeste. Reactions after death. News of his death reached the Philippines. La Política de Espa plus or minus en Filipinas, the organ of the friars, paid homage to him. Rama Cubed en Blanco y Arenas, the Governor-General of the Philippines at the time, eulogized Del Pilar as, "return of Del Pilar's remains and final interment." Del Pilar's remains were returned to the Philippines on December 3, 1920 and was buried initially at the Manila North Cemetery. It was later transferred to his birthplace in Bulacan, Bulacan on August 30, 1984, under a monument. Freemasonry. Del Pilar was initiated into Freemasonry in 1889. He served as Venerable Master of the famous Solidaridad Lodge of Madrid. He became a close friend of Miguel Copyright Almorita Sagrario, a professor at the Universidad Central de Madrid and Grand Master of Masons of the Grand Orient Spa plus or minus Ol. Popular culture. Del Pilar was portrayed by actor Dennis Marazigan in the award-winning 1998 film, Jose Copyright Rizal. Notable works, Kagat Ka Cubed, Das Lanit Toxan, Ang Kadaquilan ng Dios, La Sobrano Manakala en Filipinas, Pazia Cubed ng Dapat Ipagalap ng Personang Taong Babasa, La Freilokraka a Filipina, Saga Cubed TNG Spa plus or minus Azar Hiba CNG Filipinas, Dupluhan. Delits. Bugtungs, Zabam Basang Kababayan, see also, La Solidaridad, Philippine Revolution, Propaganda Movement, References. Bibliography. External links, Bulacan, Philippines, Tourism Marcelo H. Del Pilar Shrine, Acara plus or minus Gat-Ko. Philippine History, Plaridel, The Philippine Revolution, La Solidaridad.